Welcome back to the Perpetual Wealth Podcast, a show for clients of Paradigm Life. This season, we're empowering you to take control of your financial future using the core principles of the Perpetual Wealth strategy. Now, before we dive in, a quick but essential disclaimer. While this podcast is primarily for our valued clients at Paradigm Life, it's open to anyone interested in enhancing their financial knowledge. However, please remember that our information should not be taken as a direct tax, legal, or financial advice. We strongly recommend consulting with a wealth strategist at Paradigm Life or your financial team before making any decisions based on our discussions. Today, we continue our journey into cash flow, protection, and wealth building, the foundational principles of the Perpetual Wealth strategy. Let's dive in and explore how to optimize your wealth and achieve financial independence. Your journey continues now. Hey everyone, welcome back to the final segment of our three-part series on real estate. This one, we're going to be talking about real estate investment. And the title of the episode is Investment Unearthed, Unlocking the Potential of Real Estate. You like the pun?
I do. Yes, I like the pun.
All right, so let's get into it, right? Obviously, we met at a investment conference, right? We've been around real estate investment for quite some time. I was involved in real estate and had some very enlightening moments and experiences during 2008, 2009, and learned from those lessons. But right now, obviously, we're in a period of correction, and so there's things happening right now that most people weren't anticipating, right? So these cycles of real estate investment, I know that you've invested a ton in real estate and has had some really great successes, but also some really valuable lessons. So let's get into it. But let's first recap episode 1 and 2. Right, stacking the principles of those episodes so that we can hit the ground running with this one.
Yeah, so real estate is a big decision. It is one that is illiquid. You can't get out of it quickly. And when you do make the transition of going into real estate and then out of real estate, it can be expensive. There's typically broker fees and sales charges, and there could be tax impacts of doing so. So it's not something it's not a decision you want to make with too little knowledge. It can be expensive with respect to gaining experience the hard way, which is what I think you said, a very valuable lesson. That's a way of saying I lost a lot of money. But it also helped me understand the lesson and make a lot of money in the future after that. So I love the investment side of real estate. It shares a lot to the primary residence side of real estate. I mean, it's the same asset after all. And fundamentally, what we talked about initially about why real estate, why is real property that important? I mean, it's fundamental to freedom and to capitalism and being able to do what you want with your family, which I call agency. It's fundamental to what we try to help clients do, and how I think you can live your best life is having control, ownership of real property. And the way you can really, really accelerate it is through this last segment, which is investment side.
Yep, and we live in a country, right? Despite all people are infallible, and if there's people involved, there's going to be some fallibility. But looking at really where we live compared to other nations, right, where property laws are muddy, where title laws and title proof and the legal system, right, essentially has property taken away, whether it's the government taking away or somebody else making a false claim. Like, we live in a society where, wow, real estate ownership is so prevalent, but also there's so much certainty around it. Okay, when it comes to kind of a legal side of things. However, the fallibility that really puts real estate into obviously don't do that, or success or failure, it really comes down to the individual investor. And we've found that education is huge. Education allows you to have more control, more influence. It reduces risk. At the same time, regardless of how much education you have, okay, life still happens. And so there's other ways in which you kind of protect for the anomalies, other ways that you protect for downturns in the economy, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to get into a lot of that today, because The point in that first episode was really to show that there's so much demand for the different types of property that exist, the different types of real estate. Okay. And you being able to own that and be the supplier of real estate, okay, there's margin. And it's not just residential real estate renting out to, and being a landlord, right? Look at Airbnb, right? Airbnb really revolutionized how people could buy a residential property and potentially have higher income than if they rented it on a longer term lease. But then COVID happened, right? And that wasn't possible for a lot of people, right? Because they relied on nightly rentals and people weren't traveling because of COVID. Anyway, so there's lots of different nuances, but the idea of real estate is there is high demand. You can be the supplier of that demand, and there's always going to be margin if you do it the right way. Getting into a residential real estate, right, when it comes to a primary residence, even though mortgage types are the same, okay, properties kind of are the same, how the property is used, how you analyze, and how you treat the acquisition, you need to take some other things into consideration. So maybe we can start with that.
Yeah. So first thing you got to realize is the differences between primary residence and investment real estate. Like there are definitely commonalities, right? And those are the things that make it a good investment. It is a thing of universal need. Everyone needs it. That's why people will pay you to rent it from you, because they actually need that thing, right? They may skip their car payment and get that repossessed, but it will be the last thing they skip, deciding to sleep outside on the ground, right? So they will pay for rent. And so that makes it an investment that you have that you can count on, right? There's no certainty that the Chick-fil-A that you invested in is always going to pay you, but it's more likely that the rental property will continue to pay me. Somebody will pay you. Maybe not your current resident, or your current tenant, but somebody will pay you. So that's the good side. What you should think about real estate being different is that it should not be an emotional decision. And so many people make that mistake. They think, well, I had a good experience owning my own property, so I'm going to, use that same experience, and that's all the knowledge I'm going to gain when I go buy a rental property. And so we go get the cutest rental property, or we go get one that, somebody said was a fun place to live. Or we turn our primary residence and we decide to go move into something else, and we turn that into a rental just because we had a good experience there. And so it's this emotional side that we're trying to translate into the financial side. So you should really look at investment. Even if it was your last primary residence, look at it from a purely unemotional math side of it to see, does this make sense or not make sense?
And this will be part of the tutorials that we're going to be doing as an extension of this series. Okay, but in the end, human beings are creatures of habit. And if we've done something one way, we'll typically apply certain lessons maybe in a different context. And so if you've purchased a house and have never purchased a rental property, you're going to take the elements that you use to purchase the house, whether it's the toilets that you want, or the color on the walls, or the yard and the landscaping, the types of windows. I mean, there's so many different elements, but if you apply those same decisions to a rental property, you're going to negatively impact the success of that property. Because in the end, when it comes to investment, right, there are choices in investment. And when you invest in one thing, okay, you give up your ability to invest in an alternative. So let's say in this case, it's the stock market versus investment real estate. Okay, looking at that, obviously the reason to choose real estate over the stock market, okay, most of the time, actually I'll strip that out. I would say let's just use it as comparison. But let's say that you're not an astute stock market investor and you're getting into real estate. In the stock market, obviously, expertise is really where people get gains. Within real estate, I feel that there are more gains if you do it the right way, and it doesn't require as much education as you would need to properly navigate the market. So as you get into real estate, okay, you're doing it to get a return. You could have been in the market and get a return, okay, but now you're choosing to get into real estate. So if you're buying, $500 toilets, right, and you're putting in these amazing glass showers and these really fancy handles on doors in a C type of neighborhood, okay, that is not a wise investment. Okay, what you're trying to do is get in, right, where you're providing a nice place for somebody to live, but you're doing it in the most efficient way possible. You're supplying, right, to their demand. They're demanding a place to live with certain criteria. So getting into it the most efficient way possible allows you to have the most optimal returns. Does that make sense? Would you add to that?
Yeah, I would say that, I completely agree. And I would say that with real estate, there's a phrase in the real estate world that time turns every horrible deal. Time will make you look like, even with your worst deal, a genius, right? You look like a genius eventually with real estate because of appreciation, because of the universal need of the asset. You can kind of not just wait your way out of it, but you can work your way out of a bad decision. If you buy way above market 20 years from now, that's going to be irrelevant,
correct,
right?
Yep.
But it may take a while to get there. And so real estate compared to another one, you brought up some great points there. I would say that unlike a point and click kind of asset where, I decided to buy a share of Apple stock and some guy in Ethiopia sold me that share, not that I know that, but, the exchange happened on what's called a perfect exchange or a perfect market, meaning that it was bought and sold at that moment by anybody across the globe at the same rate. Just because I know the CEO of Apple, I didn't get a better deal than somebody else. But real estate, for many reasons, is really an inefficient market, which it can be to your advantage, right? So you can first of all, there's a lot of different ways in which you make money in real estate. It's a multidimensional asset. So I use this acronym just so I can remember all the aspects of it, that real estate's an ideal investment. And so the letter or the word ideal is an acronym for you can get cash flow or income from it. You can get deductions. And there's one huge one, it's called depreciation, where you get to pretend like its value goes to zero over a few years and take that as a tax deduction. You're building equity, tenants paying off your mortgage. It's going up in value because of appreciation and inflation. And
you also have the
that,
mortgage. You also have a mortgage, which you obviously can use to acquire that asset.
Yep. So
right?
leverage on your dollars.
So acquisition costs are much less than if you were to buy an asset without leverage.
Right. And so when you add up all those different features, it can often outperform what a person with the same education level could do in a more efficient market like the stock market.
All right. So getting into, again, let's talk about first investment property. Where do you see the biggest challenges people face, both from maybe pulling the trigger, then to actually buying it the right way and getting the returns that they were anticipating?
Well, one of them is that kind of emotional buying. I wouldn't live there. That's not the point, right? And so one is it's emotional on that. It's also emotional from the perspective that the first time you're out there, you're going to feel like the Lone Ranger. Listen, if your friends were doing it, you'd probably already be doing it, and you wouldn't feel unusual. But most of the time, we are standing out from our group of friends and people that we know, and we're doing something that they think is crazy. Like renting a property or being a rental property owner, 90+% of the people out there, I think, would say, oh, you mean like you used to live in the house and you're renting it out to somebody else, right? So to just intentionally go out there and buy an asset for the purpose of renting it, especially if it's not where you live, that's way out there on the fringes of where you're going to find other people. So you're going to feel like a Lone Ranger. You're going to feel a little bit weird about it. Then there's the aspect of finding out what is a good fit for your goals, your financial goals, like what kind of real estate. So Patrick, just, run us through a quick, here's a few different kinds of real estate. I mean, there's a lot.
There are. Right? And I would say, the first one, which is, let's say it's a house you used to live in, right? So it's the residential idea. I think some people by default get into rentals, like Carlos Boozer, right? Mm-hmm. Carlos Boozer got into rentals not because he bought his Bel Air mansion to rent.
Life
right?
happened.
Just life happened, right? So getting into it, he saw some benefit. And I don't know what his real estate, if he's done any more outside of that. Okay, but that's typically where people start, right? Is in that residential zone, because in the residential zone, that's where the highest demand is. Mm-hmm. Okay, especially if we were to look at the median income of people, right in the center, there's the most amount of people demanding a place to live, right? So you have to understand that you minimize risk just by that alone, choosing to buy a rental property with the understanding that there's a lot of people that are going to demand it, right, to live there. So you won't necessarily have gaps in rental income, right, or tenants, right? So that's the first thing. Then obviously you start to go up from there. You have multi-unit, mm-hmm. right, which is, let's say, just to 4 units, which is still considered residential. Then beyond that, you get into multifamily. This is the kind of the commercial zone. Then you get into multi-hundred complexes of multifamily. Mm-hmm. Then you get into, the industrial, you have residential, you have retail, you have mixed use, you have land, you have farmland. Right? Mm-hmm. I can't remember what other, we made a big list of them. But you have the industrial areas as well. So you have lots of different types of real estate. And again, the same principles apply, which is is there a demand? If there is a demand, can you supply it, right, with a good margin?
Yeah, exactly. And each of them have their advantages. So, for example, a lot of people will start off with single family homes because they understand it. They've interacted with that, with their own house or at least renting something. And it has some advantages, just other than just being familiar with it and being kind of an easy first step. You can get tremendous loans for single family homes. And those are available for the large multifamily too, but there's this middle ground after you get like a 4-unit. If you go beyond that, like a 5-unit building, most people have no idea how to get good loans there. And in fact, in a lot of cases, there aren't great loans there because it's this kind of redheaded stepchild. There's
not much demand.
Right.
Again, you want to follow where the demand is because banking follows demand as well.
Yeah. And so one of the beautiful things about single family homes is that you have lots of exit strategies, right? If you go into it with a long-term rental or a long-term renter in mind, a 1-year kind of renter, and you realize, gosh, it's not a great thing, then maybe you can sell it to the person who's renting it. You're not going to sell a fourplex to the guy renting it in most cases, right? It's another investor. You could turn it into a short-term rental, or you could just sell it on the open market to anybody who thinks it's a cute little house. You can move into it, right? So there's a lot of different options there. On the other side of the spectrum, let's say you have a 200-unit apartment building you're looking at. There's a lot of value there too, and the main thing is scale. Like you can have, I'm paying 10% for every single family home I have, and the guy's got to get in his truck to go fix the faucet. But if I have a 200-unit building, I have on-site property management, and they're handling a lot of the challenges, and I can have enough scale. I can hire a maintenance
economies
guy,
of scale, yep.
Right? And then for example, industrial, as an example, or retail, it's something that typically is called a triple net lease, which is just amazing if you've ever had a single-family home that you get calls on, right? They're required to handle most of the expenses, the taxes, the insurance. They have to do the upgrades. They are in charge of most of the repairs. And so that's a huge weight off your back, right? So a lot of times people who are real estate investing will actually go through seasons in their life. They'll be the 1 to 4 family rental person, and then they scale up to apartment buildings. And then they don't like the phone calls, and they go into like buying a Walgreens, which is triple net lease, and they just get paychecks in the mail. And then they're like, gosh, I don't even want to be subjected to the ups and downs of the market and the retail. I'm just going to transition that stuff into raw land and pass that on to my kids, right? So sometimes there's seasons of life, but sometimes there's people. I have a great friend where I live down in Florida. He's been doing single family homes in his local town for like 50 years, and he's got a ton of them, and he loves doing it. And so, it's somewhat about tying your kind of personality to the asset. But I would say in general, people like to shift through seasons as they go through real estate ownership. And then there's the whole, not even, there's kind of the ancillary or the side aspect to it where you can be a hard money lender, or you can be a remodeler. You can have an actual active business associated with it.
Yep. So one thing that's interesting here, I think, is you sometimes people by default get into investment real estate right through a single family home, and like we talked about before, because mortgage financing is easy, relatively low down payment, all based on credit score, not based on the property, and there's high demand there. It puts people in this state of okay, I want another one, and then they start to graduate right as they accumulate. At the same time, just as much as there's downsides to taking the approach you use to buying a personal residence and applying that to an investment property, what starts to happen is residential investment property theory, acquiring that, okay, and then applying that same theory to industrial or commercial, right, or hard money. Okay, there are other factors at play that actually increase risk. Okay, so you got to look at, again, as you graduate into more property, as you graduate into different types of property, the risk goes up unless you have more control, and control comes from education and experience, right? So maybe talk, I don't know, I know you've worked a lot with real estate investors, and we have a lot of clients who are real estate investors. Okay, where do you see a lot of the breakdown when it comes to people making bad investment choices in real estate?
It's not understanding the asset class that they're in is the primary one. So not having the education, not having somebody who can be a mentor, can serve as a mentor that they can ask questions to. So it's kind of learning everything through the school of hard knocks, and then not having set up enough reserves and protection for that asset. So I have a client who is just doing amazingly well and has been for decades in downtown Annapolis, Maryland, and it's retail, and so he looks like a genius when everything's rented up and paying because he's got 10-year-long leases and he never has to do anything. And again, it's that triple net stuff. So he doesn't have to really pay much attention to anything. He's just like, yep, I own that one and I own that one. But, in times of recession, he may go, 6, 8, 10 months with nothing rented or maybe one building rented. And then all of a sudden he's going from huge positive cash flow to just bleeding negative cash flow. And so has he set himself up for the ability to, stave that off? And essentially in that kind of environment, it's got to be a lot of cash sitting on the sideline. So again, it kind of gets back to hierarchy of wealth. And as you transition or you shift from one kind of investment real estate ownership to another one, you have to first make sure, am I ready to do that? Am I prepared to do that new kind of investment? Do I understand enough, and have I set my financial life up to be successful at it?
So I'm going to add one other thing to asset class, right? Because I feel when you're in residential, it's more simple to control it by yourself, right? Maybe if a property manager as a kind of an extension of you. But when you start to get into, I would say, multifamily, industrial, land development, hard money, there are other people involved.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, this is just my heuristic, but when other people are involved, I have recognized that all people are fallible, therefore they are fallible. Not to take anything away from their expertise or whatever, but increased risk is associated with increased people involved. And I'll give, an example, a very sobering example. This was back, right during the 2008, 2009. But I just had an opportunity to be part of a land development in Branson, Missouri, and I had to get a loan, and I qualified for a loan. And essentially the developer took all the loan proceeds and disappeared.
Yeah.
Right. But I was on the hook for the loan. Mm-hmm. And so I got sued by the mortgage lender who was taken over by FDIC. And the whole thing was a sham, right? They were being investigated or whatever. And they sued me and were going to come after all of my assets. Okay. And there's a couple other people that I knew actually went bankrupt because they got sued, and because they were being sued from a recourse state, right? Which means that each state has these recourse or non-recourse laws, which means if you default on a mortgage and there's a deficiency in the value of the asset, they will come after your personal assets to make up the deficiency. So they sued all these people to get money, and a lot of people went bankrupt. But I was I was really upset during this period of time. So I did a lot of due diligence, and I just researched, what I did, why I did it. I read through all the legal paperwork, and I found out that the jurisdiction they were suing from was one state, but the mortgage lending was done under the contractual laws of another state. And that state had some non-recourse laws after a certain grace period, right? Or statute of limitations. So again, I learned a very sobering lesson. I was on the brink of like having to go bankrupt with everything, right? And have them garnish wages, right? Because of that poor decision. Yet I was able to find something there that got me off the hook. And I learned an insanely valuable lesson because I was actually able to help a lot of clients from that point forward who were having some hard times, and bankruptcy attorneys were saying, just default on your loan, default on everything, and you'll be fine. But they lived in non-recourse states, and the only asset that was underwater that they had was their real estate. And that's why they were filing bankruptcy. So it's one of those things where, like, being an astute investor requires understanding at levels deeper than just the supply and demand. Okay, or the actual, asset class. It comes down to understanding, the legal side of things. It comes to understanding, leases, as well as asset protection, how to separate, any liability associated with your investment from the other assets that you own. Right, that's another huge piece. But the point I'm trying to make is, when other people are involved, you can expect that there are going to be mistakes that are made, and you want to try to minimize those mistakes as much as possible, whether it's understanding what you're signing, understanding what you're obligating yourself to, understanding any risk associated with it, and ensuring that you're protecting other assets from that. And it's not just my experiences, but I've learned that from a lot of other people's experiences, mostly clients.
Yeah, I agree. And, that somewhat had to do with land development, but it was really about the hierarchy of wealth again, and the different tiers of hierarchy of wealth. And excited to get into that in our next segment. But that's really, I think, the big lesson there. The thing I was going to say about the different kinds of real estate and development, often people will find themselves in the middle of land development who know nothing about it. And they think it's like just some other little unique twist or aspect that they have to learn. And that is not true. Land development is like waking up on Mars if you've been living on the earth. It is a completely different animal. You have to learn a ton of stuff about about relations with city governments, about permitting, about the time that it takes to do one of those things. I mean, I recommend just tripling whatever the estimated time is on land development. Do you have the money to be able to extend the loans and things like that for that period? How do you overcome, political environment where people just come in and say, no, you shouldn't be able to do this because I'll lose my view, or some striped animal, that you didn't know existed, it lives there. So you just have to be very, very careful when it comes to land development. And, I think people end up with it in as simple as situations as, well, I can't find the property that we want to rent. So, hey, look, there's raw land. Let's just build it. Right? It's not that simple of putting the sticks down on the land.
Well, let's get into hierarchy of wealth. I think that's an important piece because if you really look at a choice to make an investment, we're not here saying that there's a perfect investment, that you put your money into something and it's going to do exactly what you anticipated, guaranteed. Obviously, there are some investments that have a higher probability of doing that than others. But in the end, life is going to happen. Life is going to change. The world is going to change. Reality is going to change. And that presents different circumstances for the investment that existed when you made the investment in the first place. Yeah. So when you're making an investment, there is inherent risk. So what we developed, years ago was a way in which you can determine asset allocation, based on two primary factors, control and inherent risk. Okay, and we really looked at, what are some tiers associated with control and risk that we could allocate an investment or an asset to. But then we realized, right, that one asset for one person, right, could be much less risky than the same person owning that another person owning that same asset. Does that make sense? Yeah. Right. So the idea is like the hierarchy of wealth is what we call it, and there'll be some references in the show notes that you can visit. But the hierarchy of wealth is just a way to position all of your assets and how they're allocated. We have certain ranges of allocation for tier 1, which is a tier that has the highest degree of certainty. Okay. Obviously, there's going to be some lower returns there. The objective of tier 1 is to get the highest returns for the highest degree of certainty. But then there's tier 2, right, which obviously has some higher risk, but likely higher returns. Tier 3, and then tier 4, which are your speculative investments that you can, essentially lose everything, but have a potential for gain. When you have this, right, you're able to determine your risk appetite pretty easily. Okay, what that means is, like, let's say you have a lot of money in tier 1 and tier 2, and you have an opportunity for a tier 3 investment. Okay, now using the hierarchy of wealth that, maybe I can start to allocate to this tier 3, and if things go well, awesome. If not, then I still have my other tier 2 and tier 1, right, as a backup, right? Yeah. So I don't go bankrupt. But what ends up happening for most people, right, is they start out in investments that they don't understand, don't control. There's zero risk. There's very little liquidity. Okay, and it's right at tier 3, tier 4, right at the top. Highest risk, potential highest returns, but the highest degree of risk and highest degree, especially the probability of loss.
Yeah. So this is a statement about humans, I guess, but the risk comes in this hierarchy as you go further up from. So the investment hierarchy tiers are 2, 3, and 4, and 4 is at the top, right? And as you go up, you take on more risk because you're giving up control. And you're giving up insight into what's happening with your money. But the risk is specifically the other humans that are getting involved, right? So as you go higher and higher in the hierarchy of wealth, you're bringing on more people, which means that they might be a crook, they might be incompetent, they might be both, they might just be, lazy and don't tell you what's going on or inform you. All of those things are risks that are coming in, human nature, other people involved, and between you specifically and your money in this investment. And so I have people ask, for example, hey, this apartment building that most of my money is in, I've invested most of my money in this apartment building. Okay, that's not a good start to a conversation, but let's say that's it. Where is it? Is it tier 2, 3, or 4? Right? I can't answer the question based on what they just told me right there, right? Like their money's in an apartment building. But what I don't know is what is their interaction level with the apartment building. I have clients who I have a client who has a 50-unit apartment building and retired and took over direct ownership and control of that asset before they had managers and a bunch of other people. He's in tier 2. Like that is a directly controlled asset. He's got a lot of insight and control. He has very little risk. There is still risk, like the market could dive or something, but it's low risk. If instead, though, if he sold that to an individual who was raising money to buy it from him, and I invested in that, now I'm in what's called a tier 3 syndication. So why am I at more risk? Well, because I'm not there every day, right? And so now the person who's running it may make mistakes. But what if he gets tired of it and says, I don't want this thing anymore? And he sells it to a real estate investment trust, which is a hedge fund, which has pooled together that one and 50 others. And then you see that and hear a good advertisement about it, and you point and click and buy into that. You're at even more risk. Maybe not, I mean, they may do a better job, but the risk is that they don't, because they have a bunch of apartment buildings and they got a bunch of other stuff they're paying attention to. And so my experience when I'm that far removed from my money up in tier 4 is that it may go well, but if it does, it's luck, right? It's not actions I've taken to get myself there.
So that's, I mean, those are the distinguishing factors. And that is obviously for those who are versed in investment. That's why there's higher returns, right? It's because there's higher degrees of risk. But if you look at, again, tier 1 returns, tier 2 returns, and then you get into tier 3 and tier 4, you're going to find, especially using the perpetual wealth strategy, you're going to find that there has to be a pretty good return that's worth you taking risk of loss, okay, and you putting your future in jeopardy because you want a couple percentage points, 200 basis points or more, right, with a higher return. Because sometimes the math doesn't always make sense or make it worth it. But unless you actually have your asset allocation in that framework and are able to rely on your wealth strategist to show you, okay, if you do this, like, okay, we're taking here and this is what's going to happen, okay, when you start to see the math behind it and how much it impacts or how little it impacts, that's going to help you make a better decision too. Because most of the time, I would say from an investment standpoint, the majority of investment drive comes from the emotional side of human beings, okay, and does not necessarily have an equal balance in the practical mathematical side of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I would push back a little bit on the premise that higher risk means higher returns.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can. It like enables higher return. It certainly doesn't guarantee higher returns. And I don't think it's actually necessary. If you look at, I tell people when I'm talking hierarchy of return, maybe on a first meeting or a second meeting, I ask them, do you know anybody who's never, now that you understand this kind of premise of the hierarchy, have you ever seen an Egyptian pyramid that's like half built, and it was half built 2,000 years ago, and it's still half built, and it's not going to fall down. It's very stable. And can you think of anybody who never left tier 2? And when they think about it long enough, they go, "Oh yeah, Elon Musk has never left tier 2, and Warren Buffett's never left tier 2, and several other people who built companies and focused only on that company, right?" So there's no requirement to go beyond that. And I think you would also agree those people had pretty good returns on their investment. Yet for most of us to get into the game of, if I want to be in biotech, it's really likely I'm going to be in tier 4 in biotech because I don't know anything about it personally. I mean, I could change my life and learn about it and maybe be successful, but I can get those higher returns because I brought somebody on my team that can do it at scale and is interested in talking to me. Well, he's not really going to talk to me, but he's interested in me investing because I point and clicked, not because, he was raising funds and he just thought I was a cool person to invest, right? So it opens opportunity, I think, that can provide that higher return. But if you do have expertise or you want to get expertise there, and there's a high likelihood that you could be good at it, I'd recommend holding it in the lowest tier you possibly can.
And looking at, I would say, as we kind of finalize this episode, right? If you look at those that are in tier 3 and tier 4, that have kind of balanced things the right way. My experience has been when there is loss, right? The loss is contextualized as a really valuable lesson. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to make the same type of investment again, but it leads to, okay, what can I learn from that experience, right? That I can apply to the next tier 3 or next tier 4 investment. Whereas how I've seen most people make investment, okay, they don't have, again, like the cash flow protection and using the hierarchy of wealth to determine their asset allocation based on risk and control, because they don't have that, right? They
don't have the framework.
They don't have the framework. And ultimately what happens is when there is a loss, okay, it isn't like, what lesson can I learn? It's more survival, right? Yeah. And they won't get back in the game because of that one experience. And I've seen that countless times where lots of value in making a decision to invest here, okay, but because they invested so much, they put their entire life at risk, and therefore were so scarred, they're not going to get back into the game for the fear of that happening again. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think, as you play out your investing world and your investing life and gain experience, don't underestimate the impact of the human element of things. And there are so many people involved in tier 4 assets between you and your money that you'll never meet. That the opportunity for failure can be really, really high. And like you said, Patrick, often you don't learn the lesson from that. It'll just be like, well, you're in it for the long haul, and money goes up and money goes down, and apparently losing half of it today, like I did in 2009, is just part of the game. And I was like, I just don't like living in that world of that low of control.
Yep.
And so taking ownership and actually taking the time to learn about things like real estate, even if in the end you just shift it all to that tier 4 real estate investment trust, at least you will understand more about it and you can predict when to get in and out of it. Where typically we go in with our money and just kind of pick from a smorgasbord menu of this industry, or I heard that that foreign equities are better at the moment, or I heard that real estate or commercial is best, and you find some stock to click on. You're setting yourself up for failure because you haven't done the due diligence, you haven't learned and experienced beforehand.
Well, this was a fun series. Right? I really enjoyed it. I mean, Gary and I have great conversations, outside of recording any media on these topics. And I've learned so much over the years personally, but also through clients and looking at you as our valuable clients. You're going to be presented with opportunities throughout the course of your life. And the idea is your education, your experience is going to make you a better investor. And it's going to allow you to get better gains, but also minimize the risk you're taking at the same time.
And I would like to, and I appreciate, and thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this, but also getting this amazing content out to all of my clients and all of our Paradigm Life clients, certainly mine who are really, really focused on real estate investing. I just want to kind of close with my big picture takeaway about why real estate. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning of this episode, which is that it's a multidimensional asset. And it's not just about the cash flow. It's not just about the equity building or the appreciation or being able to use leverage. It's all of those combined. And there have been several years where my wife said, you know what, this year I'm going to prove that this pain in the ass asset that we have, 123 Main Street, I'm going to prove to you that this thing is losing us money and we should get rid of it. And then when we take all the elements together, she's like, I can't believe it, but this one also was a net gain, even though the cash flow was negative.
Interesting.
Right?
Well, in the end, obviously, life is full of incredible opportunities, right? Go out and really experience life at a higher level, right? The purpose of investing, the purpose of getting your personal finances in check, right, is just to put you in a position to have a better experience in life, day in and day out. And so I hope you guys have found value in the education. Make sure if you haven't watched the first series of kind of this new season on cash flow protection and wealth, to do that. And we look forward to a couple other segments that's going to dive more into really the education we feel is relevant at this time for our clients to make the best decisions possible in order to live the most financially independent life as possible. So take care. Gary, thank you again for participating. You're amazing. Really appreciate you. And yeah, we'll see you guys on the next episodes.
Thanks, Pat.